judge, even alleging that the Supreme Court, which of course includes 3 Trump nominees, is throwing them under the bus. Another says the high court is trying to make it look like the lower courts are biased against the president.
Know that there's a chance that any ruling they do might get overturned by the Supreme Court, and the judges I talked to said they know that, right?
Right.
This isn't
That's
what
part of the deal.
Yeah, this isn't what they're complaining about. They're complaining about how they're doing it, and the external noise that's coming from the Trump administration and their allies.
We have an update to a story we've been covering this week. The BBC apologized today to President Trump over a misleading edit of his speech to supporters before they stormed the Capitol on January 6th. But the broadcaster denied its actions amounted to defamation. Trump lawyers had threatened the BBC with $1 billion lawsuit. The dispute stems from a documentary that aired in the lead-up to last year's election that included separate parts of Trump's speech that were spliced together. In its retraction, the BBC said the edit, quote, gave the mistaken impression that President Trump had made a direct call for violent action.
All right, so imagine this. It's late at night. Trump's legal team has filed an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. This is their last shot, their final attempt to delay Trump's sentencing on 34 felony convictions. They're arguing presidential immunity. They're claiming the whole prosecution was illegitimate. They're throwing every legal argument they can think of at the wall, hoping something sticks. And then in a brief order issued after midnight, the Supreme Court says no, denied. The sentencing goes forward. No more delays, no more appeals. Trump must face the consequences of his conviction. Can you believe this? The Supreme Court, including 2 conservative justices, just destroyed Trump's last legal defense. 5-4 decision. 3 liberal justices plus 2 conservatives joining to say Trump's arguments have no merit. The immunity claim doesn't apply. The delay tactics are over. Judge Juan Merchan can now proceed with sentencing immediately. And that means Trump is facing the very real possibility of prison time. Right now. Not after more appeals. Not after the election. Right now. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Supreme Court out with this ruling on the Trump administration and passports. They're now saying that the Trump administration can force people to ID themselves on passports based on their sex at birth, meaning male or female would be the only options. Critics tonight call that a major blow to transgender rights.
This decision came just hours before Trump's scheduled sentencing. The timing is crucial because Trump's entire strategy has been delayed, push everything past the election, hope for a political solution, hope that if he wins, he can make the cases go away. But the Supreme Court just demolished that strategy by refusing to grant a stay, by allowing the sentencing to proceed immediately. The court is saying Trump has to face this now. He can't run out the clock anymore. Judge Merchan has indicated he may impose a sentence ranging from probation to prison time. And legal experts are saying that given Trump's behavior throughout the trial, given his contempt violations, given his complete lack of remorse, prison time is a real possibility. Maybe not years, maybe not even months, but some amount of incarceration to make clear that felony convictions have consequences, even for former presidents. The legal language in the Supreme Court's order is significant. The justices said Trump's burden from proceeding with sentencing is relatively insubstantial in light of the trial court's intent to impose a sentence. That's the court saying, look, you're going to be sentenced anyway. There's no reason to delay it. You've been convicted. The trial court wants to move forward. Your arguments for delay are weak, so we're not going to stop it. Trump's lawyers had argued that sentencing him would create significant collateral consequences, that it would interfere with his ability to govern if he wins the election, that it would set a dangerous precedent of criminalizing political opponents. The Supreme Court looked at all of those arguments and said, nope, not buying it. The conviction was for unofficial conduct, personal conduct, not actions taken as president. So immunity doesn't apply. And the fact that you're running for president again doesn't mean you get to avoid the consequences of your criminal conviction. This is a historic moment. No former president has ever been this close to real prison time. Nixon resigned before he could be prosecuted and then got pardoned. Other presidents have faced scandals, but not criminal charges. Trump is the first to be convicted of felonies, and now he's the first to be facing immediate sentencing with the real possibility of incarceration. The Supreme Court's decision makes clear that no president, current or former, is above criminal prosecution, that you can be held accountable for crimes even if you held the highest office in the land. The political implications are staggering. Trump is actively running for president. He's campaigning, he's holding rallies, he's raising money, and now he's about to be sentenced on felony convictions. How does a campaign continue when the candidate might be ordered to report to prison? How do voters react to a nominee who's literally wearing an ankle monitor or checking in with a probation officer? The optics are catastrophic. Even Trump's hardcore supporters, the ones who've stood by him through everything, some of them have to be having doubts now. Because this isn't just political persecution anymore. This is the Supreme Court, including conservative justices, saying the conviction is legitimate and the sentencing should proceed. That's harder to dismiss as a witch hunt when the highest court in the land agrees it's valid. Republicans are facing a nightmare scenario. Their likely nominee is about to be sentenced on felony charges, and they have no good options. If they abandon Trump, they risk splitting their party. If they support him, they're supporting a convicted felon who might be ordered to prison. There's no spin that makes this look good. Judge Merchan now has complete authority to proceed with sentencing. No more legal obstacles, no more delays. The judge can set a sentencing date and impose whatever sentence seems appropriate based on the evidence and Trump's conduct. And Merchan has made clear throughout this case that Trump's behavior, his contempt violations, his attacks on the court and witnesses, all of that will be considered in sentencing. Trump showed no remorse. He expressed no understanding that what he did was wrong. He treated the entire process with contempt, and judges don't react well to that. They tend to impose harsher sentences on defendants who show no respect for the legal system. So Trump's own conduct might have sealed his fate here. His refusal to take any of this seriously, his constant attacks, his violations of gag orders, all of that could result in Judge Merchan deciding that only prison time will adequately serve the purposes of the law. The immediate nature of this is what makes it so dramatic. This isn't happening in 6 months after more appeals. This is happening now. Trump could be sentenced within days. And once sentenced, the consequences begin immediately. If Merchan orders incarceration, Trump would have to report. If Merchan orders probation, Trump would have to comply with conditions. If Merchan orders fines or community service, those have to be satisfied. There's no more waiting, no more delay. The Supreme Court has spoken. The last defense is destroyed, and Trump must face the consequences of his conviction right now. So let's break this down. Let's talk about what the Supreme Court actually ruled and why. Let's examine what Judge Merchan might do at sentencing. Let's discuss what happens if Trump is ordered to prison. And let's look at the political and legal implications of the first former president facing immediate criminal sentencing with the possibility of incarceration. Okay, so let's get into what the Supreme Court actually decided and why this ruling is so significant. Trump's legal team filed an emergency application to the Supreme Court asking for a stay of sentencing. A stay would have prevented Judge Merchan from proceeding until Trump's appeals were resolved. And those appeals could take months or even years. So getting a stay would have effectively meant Trump could avoid sentencing until well after the election, maybe indefinitely, if he won and could use executive power to interfere with the case. Trump's main argument for the stay was presidential immunity. He claimed that because some of the evidence used at trial related to his time as president, the entire conviction was invalid. Now, the Supreme Court had previously ruled that presidents have immunity for official acts, but the court was clear that immunity doesn't cover unofficial acts, personal conduct, crimes committed for personal benefit rather than in service of the office. And the conviction Trump got was for falsifying business records to cover up hush money payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. That's personal conduct. That's not official presidential business. That's Trump trying to hide embarrassing information to help his campaign. But Trump's lawyers tried to argue that because some evidence at trial involved communications that happened while he was president, the whole case was tainted by the immunity issue. The Supreme Court looked at that argument and rejected it. The 5-justice majority said the conduct Trump was convicted of was unofficial. Therefore, immunity doesn't apply. Therefore, there's no basis for delaying sentencing. The 2 conservative justices who joined the 3 liberals in this ruling, that's significant. It shows this isn't a partisan political decision. It shows that even justices who might be sympathetic to Trump on other issues can look at this case and say, no, the legal arguments don't support a stay. The conviction is valid. The sentencing should proceed. 4 justices dissented, presumably the most conservative members of the court who might have been willing to grant a stay, but they were outvoted. And in the Supreme Court, 5 votes is all you need. The majority decision is final. The dissent doesn't change the outcome. Trump's attempt to delay sentencing is denied, and Judge Merchan can proceed immediately. The timing of this Supreme Court decision is crucial. It came just hours before the scheduled sentencing. Trump's legal team was clearly hoping the court would grant an emergency stay at the last minute, that the justices would see the political implications and decide to hit pause while everything got sorted out. But the court didn't do that. The court said sentencing goes forward as scheduled. and that timing suggests the justices saw no merit in Trump's arguments. If there were serious legal questions that needed to be resolved, the court probably would have granted a temporary stay to give themselves time to fully consider the issues. But they didn't. They issued a brief order saying denied. That's the court saying these arguments are weak and there's no reason to delay the sentencing. Now let's talk about what Judge Merchant might do at the sentencing hearing. Trump was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records. Each count is a felony under New York law. The maximum sentence for each count is 4 years in prison. So theoretically, Trump could be facing more than 100 years behind bars if Merchant imposed consecutive maximum sentences. But that's not going to happen. Judges almost never impose maximum consecutive sentences, especially for nonviolent crimes committed by first-time offenders. So realistically, Trump is looking at a range of possible sentences. At the low end, probation. Merchant could sentence Trump to probation, which would mean regular check-ins with the probation officer, compliance with certain conditions, but no jail time. In the middle, there's home confinement or intermittent incarceration. Merchant could order Trump to serve time at home with an ankle monitor, or could order him to report to jail on weekends while allowing him to be free during the week. At the high end, there's actual prison time. Merchant could sentence Trump to months in a state prison facility. Legal experts are debating which outcome is most likely. Some argue that as a first-time offender convicted of nonviolent crimes, Trump should get probation, that incarceration is reserved for more serious offenses or repeat offenders. Others argue that Trump's behavior throughout the trial, his contempt violations, his complete lack of remorse, his attacks on the justice system, all of that warrants a harsher sentence. That prison time is necessary to vindicate the law and show that felony convictions have real consequences even for powerful people. Judge Merchant has been clear throughout this case that Trump's conduct would be a factor in sentencing. The judge documented 10 separate contempt violations. The judge warned Trump repeatedly about respecting court orders. The judge expressed frustration with Trump's continued attacks on witnesses and jurors despite gag orders. So it's reasonable to expect that Merchant might impose a sentence on the harsher end of the spectrum. Maybe not years in prison, but some amount of incarceration to make a point about accountability. The collateral consequences argument that Trump's lawyers made is interesting because it highlights the conflict between Trump's legal situation and his political ambitions. Trump is running for president. If he wins, he'd be inaugurated in January. But if he's sentenced to prison, how does that work? Can you be president while incarcerated? Technically, there's no constitutional prohibition. The Constitution sets requirements for who can be president, age and citizenship, and residency. But it doesn't say you can't be president if you're in prison. So theoretically, Trump could be elected and inaugurated while serving a prison sentence. But practically, that would be insane. How would he govern from prison? How would he meet with advisors, sign legislation, conduct foreign policy? The logistics would be impossible. So Trump's lawyers argued that sentencing him now, especially to any form of incarceration, would create these massive practical problems. The Supreme Court rejected that argument. The court essentially said those are political problems, not legal problems. The conviction is valid. The sentencing is appropriate. How Trump manages his campaign and potential presidency while dealing with the consequences of his conviction, that's his problem to solve. The precedent this sets is enormous. For the first time in American history, a former president is being held criminally accountable for their conduct. Previous presidents have done things that probably warranted prosecution, but avoided it through resignation, pardons, or prosecutorial discretion. Trump is the first to actually face trial, conviction, and sentencing, and that precedent establishes that no president is above the law, that you can be prosecuted for crimes even if you held the highest office, that presidential power doesn't exempt you from accountability. That's a healthy precedent for democracy. But it also raises questions about future political conflicts. Will every administration now try to prosecute their predecessors? Will criminal charges become a routine part of political warfare? Those are legitimate concerns. But the answer can't be that presidents should have blanket immunity from prosecution, because that would turn presidents into kings, into people who can commit crimes with impunity because of their office. The balance has to be that presidents can be prosecuted for genuine crimes, but those prosecutions have to be based on real evidence, not political revenge. Trump's behavior throughout this case has been consistent. Attack the process, attack the judge, attack the prosecutors, claim everything is rigged and political. Never acknowledge wrongdoing, never show remorse, and that strategy might have worked politically. It might have kept his base energized and loyal. But legally, it was a disaster. Because judges don't like defendants who show contempt for the court, who violate orders repeatedly, who refuse to take the process seriously. And that contempt That lack of remorse is going to be a major factor in Judge Merchan's sentencing decision. The judge has been remarkably patient throughout this case, but patience has limits, and Trump has pushed those limits repeatedly. So when Merchan imposes sentence, don't be surprised if it's on the harsher end of what's legally possible. The judge will want to make a statement that felony convictions have consequences, that disrespecting the court has consequences, that refusing to show remorse has consequences, and those consequences might include jail time. The political chaos this creates is going to dominate headlines for weeks or months. If Trump is sentenced to prison, even for a short period, how does his campaign continue? Do rallies get canceled? Do surrogates take over? Does Trump try to run the campaign from behind bars? And what about the Republican Party? Do they stick with a candidate who's literally in prison, or do they try to find a way to replace him? The party rules make replacement nearly impossible at this stage. But if Trump is incarcerated, there might be enough pressure to force some kind of extraordinary action. The impact on down ballot races could be catastrophic for Republicans. Every Republican candidate would be asked, do you support a convicted felon who's in prison? Do you think voters should elect someone serving a criminal sentence? Those are impossible questions to answer without either alienating Trump's base or alienating everyone else. So Republicans might just lose across the board because their party is tied to a candidate who's become legally and politically toxic. All right, let's break this down into the core points. Point 1. The Supreme Court's rejection of Trump's appeal eliminates his last legal obstacle to immediate sentencing. Trump has been fighting for months to delay this day. He's filed motion after motion. He's made appeal after appeal. He's used every procedural tool available to push sentencing as far into the future as possible. And the Supreme Court just said no more. The appeals are over. The delays are done. Sentencing proceeds immediately. That's a huge defeat for Trump legally because his entire strategy was built on delay, on running out the clock, on hoping something would change that would let him avoid consequences. But now there's no more time, no more opportunities for delay. Judge Merchan can schedule sentencing, and Trump has to show up and face whatever sentence is imposed. Point 2. The possibility of prison time is real and immediate. This isn't speculation anymore. This isn't legal analysts debating hypotheticals. This is Judge Merchan with the authority to send Trump to prison and no legal obstacles preventing it. The judge could decide that probation is appropriate, could decide that fines and community service are sufficient, but the judge could also decide that given Trump's contempt of court, given his lack of remorse, given the seriousness of falsifying business records to interfere with an election, prison time is necessary, and if Merchan makes that decision, Trump goes to prison right away. No more delays, no more appeals that provide automatic stays. He would be ordered to report to a facility and begin serving his sentence. The political and media impact of that would be unprecedented. A former president in handcuffs, being processed into a prison system, wearing prison clothes, being subject to all the indignities that come with incarceration. Those images would define American politics for years. Point 3. This sets a historic precedent for presidential accountability. The Supreme Court has now affirmed that former presidents can be prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced for criminal conduct, that presidential immunity doesn't provide blanket protection, that holding the highest office doesn't exempt you from the consequences of your actions. This is the rule of law, functioning as it's supposed to. No one is above the law, not billionaires, not celebrities, not presidents. Everyone is subject to the same legal system. Everyone faces consequences for criminal conduct. That's a fundamental principle of democracy, and it's being tested and affirmed through Trump's prosecution and conviction. The precedent established here will affect every future president. They'll know that criminal conduct can and will be prosecuted, that they can't hide behind the office to avoid accountability. That's probably a good thing for democracy and for limiting presidential abuses of power. Now, what actually happens at sentencing? Trump will appear before Judge Merchan. The prosecutors will make their sentencing recommendation. They'll argue for what they think is an appropriate punishment given the crimes and Trump's conduct. Trump's lawyers will make their arguments. They'll probably ask for leniency, argue that Trump is a first-time offender, point to his age and health, request probation rather than incarceration. Then Judge Merchan will hear from Trump himself. This is Trump's opportunity to address the court, to express remorse, to take responsibility for his conduct. But based on Trump's behavior throughout this case, he's probably not going to do that. He's probably going to continue claiming innocence, attacking the process, refusing to acknowledge wrongdoing, and that's going to influence Merchan's decision because judges want to see remorse. They want to see understanding that what you did was wrong. When a defendant refuses to show that, when they continue claiming innocence and attacking the system, judges tend to impose harsher sentences. After hearing from everyone, Judge Merchan will impose sentence. The judge will explain the reasoning. We'll discuss the factors considered. We'll announce what Trump's punishment will be, and that punishment becomes effective immediately. If it's prison time, Trump will be taken into custody right there in the courtroom. If it's home confinement, he'll be fitted with an ankle monitor and given the terms of his confinement. If it's probation, he'll be assigned a probation officer and given the conditions he must follow. There's no grace period, no time to get your affairs in order before reporting. The sentence begins immediately. The political fallout from whatever sentence is imposed will be massive. If Trump gets probation, his supporters will claim victory, will say the prosecution was overblown and even the judge recognized it by imposing a lenient sentence. Democrats will be disappointed, will argue that Trump should have faced real consequences. If Trump gets home confinement or intermittent incarceration, both sides will probably claim some validation. It's punishment, but not full imprisonment. If Trump gets actual prison time, that's when things get really chaotic. Trump's supporters will be enraged. There might be protests, possibly violence from his most extreme followers. Republicans will be in crisis mode, trying to figure out how to handle having a nominee who's in prison. Democrats will be celebrating that accountability finally happened. The logistics of Trump potentially being in prison while running for president are mind-boggling. How do you campaign from prison? How do you do interviews? How do you connect with voters? Trump would have to rely entirely on surrogates and social media, and even social media access might be limited depending on the facility and the rules. The campaign would essentially be run by others while Trump is locked up. That's an enormous disadvantage, and it raises questions about whether Trump could actually win under those circumstances. His base might stick with him, might even be more motivated by seeing him as a martyr. But swing voters and independents, the people who decide close elections, they're probably not going to vote for someone who's literally in prison. The Supreme Court's decision makes clear that they see no legal merit in Trump's arguments. The majority opinion is brief but definitive. Trump's burden from sentencing is relatively insubstantial. The conduct was unofficial and not covered by immunity. There's no reason to delay. That language shows the court viewed Trump's appeals as weak, as delay tactics without solid legal foundation. And by rejecting them, the court is saying the trial court got it right. The conviction is valid. The sentencing is appropriate. Proceed. The implications for Trump's other legal cases are significant too. He's still facing federal charges for the classified documents and the election subversion. He's facing state charges in Georgia. All of those cases involve Trump trying to claim immunity and delay proceedings. And the Supreme Court just told him those arguments don't work, that immunity is limited, that unofficial conduct can be prosecuted, that delay tactics will be rejected. So Trump's lawyers in those other cases just saw their primary defense strategy get destroyed by the Supreme Court. They're going to have to come up with new approaches. And with the Supreme Court having spoken definitively on these issues, lower courts are going to be less sympathetic to Trump's delay requests. The precedent is set. Trump can be prosecuted. His appeals for delay lack merit. The cases move forward. For Trump personally, this is the worst case scenario. He's about to be sentenced with the possibility of prison. His last legal defense has been destroyed. His delay strategy has failed, and he has no more moves left. He can't appeal to a higher court because the Supreme Court is the highest court. He can't delay sentencing because the court said it proceeds immediately. All he can do is show up and face whatever Judge Merchan decides is appropriate punishment for someone who spent his entire life avoiding consequences, who's used money and power and lawyers to escape accountability. This is probably the most helpless Trump has ever felt. More on this as it develops, because sentencing could happen any day now. Judge Merchan can schedule it immediately. And when it happens, when Trump stands before the judge and hears his sentence, that will be one of the most significant moments in American legal and political history. A former president being sentenced on felony convictions, potentially being ordered to prison, facing immediate consequences that he can't appeal away or delay. The Supreme Court has spoken. Trump's last defense is destroyed. The sentencing proceeds immediately. And prison is now a real and imminent possibility. This is accountability. This is the rule of law in action. This is what happens when even the highest court in the land says no, you don't get special treatment. You face the same consequences as everyone else. And we're about to see exactly what those consequences are.